Hey, I'm Elie. And at the family dinner, my mom mocked my job and screamed, "Get out," right in front of everyone. My sister laughed. My brother sneered. And I felt the weight of every lie they ever told. Every ounce of respect I earned stolen in a single night. But just when I thought I was erased, their tenant called me the owner. How did it come to this? And what will I do next? I pulled up to the old house on Drexel Avenue like I had a dozen Sundays before. The lights were on. The smell of something too expensive for a weeknight crept out through the cracked kitchen window. It was supposed to be Sunday dinner family. Food, familiar rhythms, but nothing about it felt familiar anymore. Inside, the dining room was lit soft but sharp. The table stretched longer than it used to, like they added distance on purpose. Crystal glasses sparkled. Silverware lined up too perfect. But my seat, the one at the head wasn't mine no more. Lavoris was sitting there, my son, in my chair. He raised his glass when I walked in, like he owned the whole night. Venus, his wife, kissed my cheek and smiled the kind of smile that don't reach the eyes. The kind that says, "We're only doing this for show." I nodded, kept quiet, slid into the chair furthest from where I used to sit. Nobody asked how I was. They just laughed too loud, passed dishes like I was invisible. They say time heals, I thought, looking around the table. But sometimes it just teaches you who's in charge. Lavoris stood up, still grinning. "Let's raise a glass," he said. "To Dad still out there doing those handyman jobs, still fixing sinks for folks who don't even know his name." Laughter. Even my own mama chuckled, bless her old tired heart. "At your age," she said, dabbing her mouth with a napkin, "you should be resting, not crawling under toilets like a janitor." I didn't flinch, just held my glass steady, took a slow sip. Didn't let the heat rise up my neck. You learn over time, silence ain't surrender. Sometimes silence is a mirror. Let them talk, let them laugh. You remember. A flash of my old office hit me then, back when I ran the whole property business, before I let it pass to them. Before they rewrote the story like I was just the old man who fixed things. I set my glass down. "A real man doesn't stop working just because folks stop seeing the value," I said. The room got quiet. The laughter died, caught mid-breath. I leaned back, looked Lavoris right in the face. "You collected the rent on 84th Street this month?" His grin faded just a little. "I've been meaning to," he started. "It's still under my name," I said. Calm, not angry, just facts. His jaw tightened. "You don't understand the way things work anymore." Before I could speak, my mother slammed her hand on the table. "You either respect how things are now, or you get out of this house." My ears rang. The clock ticked louder than it should have. No one moved. Not one person looked my way. I could have been a coat hanging by the door. I reached for my napkin, the brown silk one she made for me years ago, back when she still called me baby. Folded it slow. "I built this house," I said. "And yet, somehow, I'm the stranger here." I stood up. My knees ached, but my spine stayed straight. I walked past them all, Lavoris, Venus, Mama, and none of them raised a hand. No goodbye. No apology. Just silence. The sky was dark when I got in my car. Streetlights blurred in the windshield like memories too old to hold shape. I didn't turn on the radio. Didn't need noise. I had enough in my head. So this is what being invisible feels like, I thought. When your own blood starts treating you like you outlived your usefulness. Her voice came back to me, then my wife's, "Don't let them take your kindness for weakness, Elie." I pulled into my building's lot, walked, slow, to the apartment, sat down at my desk. No TV, just me, the silence, and an old spiral notebook. Inside it, paper clipped at the back, were copies of the deeds. Not all of them, but enough. Properties still under my name. Still mine. That old ache of shame in my chest, it changed, hardened, turned into something sharper. Not rage, not revenge. Just clarity. They think I'm done. But sometimes, the quietest man in the room is the one holding all the keys. Morning came slow, but I was already up, couldn't sleep after last night. My apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you. I sat at the kitchen table, old papers spread out like ghosts. Deeds, letters, bills, all of it telling stories I hadn't wanted to hear until now. That brown napkin still sat beside me. Couldn't bring myself to fold it away. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, just steady, like whoever it was didn't want the neighbors knowing they were there. I opened the door, and there stood Clarence, one of my longtime tenants from 75th Street. Tall man, polite, nervous as a man holding a secret too long. He clutched a manila envelope like it might burn through his hand. "Mr. Elie," he said. "I ain't mean to bother you. Just thought I ought to show you something." I let him in. He didn't sit. "I just came to say thank you," he said, eyes flicking toward the window. "For all them years, fixing my sink, patching that busted pipe yourself, you never charged me a dime extra. Not like your son." That last part hung in the air. "What's this?" I asked, nodding at the envelope. He hesitated, then handed it to me. I opened it. Inside were printed rental agreements. Not copies from the building's office, these were pulled straight from the original lease folder, and one of them had my name, clear as daylight. Elie Johnson, legal owner. I looked up at him. He shifted on his feet. "Folks talk, you know? I didn't know who to trust no more. But you always kept things straight. I figured you had a right to know." I told him thank you, told him to keep this between us for now. He nodded once, then left without another word. After the door shut, I just stood there. So that's how they played it. I pulled out my own folder from the cabinet. Same address, same dates, same signature. The deeds hadn't been transferred. Not legally, anyway. Lavoris had been collecting rent using my name, acting like he inherited the whole empire, while the ink still told another story. The worst kind of thief is the one who shares your last name, I muttered to myself. I sat back down. The weight of it didn't crush me, it focused me. After my wife passed, I let them handle the mail, the bills, the paperwork. Thought I was stepping back with grace. Thought I was giving them room. All I'd done was make space for betrayal. Still, I didn't call nobody, didn't confront. Just started writing notes, dates, addresses, tenants I still knew by name. I wasn't gonna yell. I was gonna build something stronger than rage, evidence. A few hours passed. I needed air, so I took a slow walk to the corner store for some bread and milk. I didn't even make it halfway before I heard, "Elie!" Miss Audra lived across from my old house. Woman knew everybody's business, but never used it unless she felt it mattered. She waved me over like it was life or death. "Don't let on, I told you," she whispered, pulling me in like we were in church. "But I heard your boy on the phone the other night. He was talking about renting out your house. Said he already changed the locks. Said, old man don't even know he ain't got no keys." I didn't flinch. Just nodded. "Thank you, Audra," I said, then walked on home. Calm on the outside, fire under the skin. They really locked me out, not just of a house, of my legacy. I walked slow the rest of the way, letting the anger turn into something colder, something cleaner. At home, I pulled an old shoebox from the top shelf of the closet. Inside were construction licenses, receipts with my name, photos of me fixing roofs, patching drywall, pouring concrete with my bare hands. Proof. Not pride proof. Then I grabbed a fresh notebook and started a new ledger. Deeds, tenants, paper trails, dates. Every lie they told had a receipt I'd kept. I remembered something my wife used to say when she saw shady dealings around the neighborhood. Always have two ledgers, the one for them and the one for the truth. I smiled then, just barely. I wasn't mad no more. I was ready. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against the walls and settled in the corners like dust. I sat in my worn armchair, the lamplight throwing shadows across the stack of papers and receipts I'd gathered since Clarence's visit. My mind replayed every detail of the dinner, every whispered conversation that Miss Audra had passed along, every lock that had appeared overnight on a door I once considered mine. Even in the stillness, I could feel a weight pressing against me, a subtle awareness that someone was watching, that the subtle shifts in my family's behavior were more than coincidence. I thought back to when my children were small, when honesty was a lesson I drilled into them, even when the truth was hard to face. I whispered to myself, if I don't listen to these whispers, they'll become shouts I can't escape. And I resolved to listen, to record, to observe, and to learn everything that had been hidden behind those closed doors. I set up a small voice recorder on the end table, telling myself I didn't trust my memory tonight. Over the next evening, I let the recorder run quietly, the soft hum of the apartment as my only companion. I caught fragments of conversations, the careless arrogance of my children spilling over. Lavoris, speaking into his phone with that familiar edge, said, "Dad's acting like he still owns half of this place." Marzena, in hushed tones, added to someone on the other line, "We'll sleep better when his name's off every register." I remained still, letting their words hang in the room, capturing them without interruption, as if silence itself could amplify their missteps. Each phrase, each subtle inflection built a quiet fury within me. I backed up the audio, labeling the files carefully, securing them in a way that made the small apartment feel like a fortress of truth. In the early morning hours, before the city had fully awakened, Carmetta came to me, her small frame trembling and tear-stained. She whispered my name and confided what she had overheard. "I heard them say Daddy was stepping out. They didn't want you to hear it," she said, her voice fragile yet urgent. She told me of Lavoris calling me useless, of Marzena mocking the work of my hands, the sweat and care I had poured into the homes they now treated as their own. I held her close, feeling the ache of betrayal mix with a protective resolve. When I placed her gently back in bed, I whispered, "Your voice matters more than their lies." It was a fleeting softness, a pause before the storm I knew was coming. By the time night fell again, I had begun arranging my battle file with purpose. The recordings, combined with Carmetta's account, allowed me to line up a chronology of betrayal. I sifted through receipts, tax records, audio clips, and notes, mapping dates when locks changed, comparing tenant statements with my own records. Each piece fit together like the frame of a building I once constructed, solid and unyielding. I drafted a letter to Rashawn, a witness whose support could tip the scales, and set it aside, knowing timing was everything. The apartment, once a quiet sanctuary, now thrummed with the silent electricity of preparation. I breathed in slowly, feeling a shift from suspicion to strategy, from helplessness to control. They may whisper tonight, but in the morning, they would have to face my voice. And in the quiet of my living room, with the city sleeping outside, I felt the first true stirrings of power return to me. I didn't announce myself. I pulled up to Lavoris and Tenatia's house with a folder under my arm, my truck idling in the driveway. The door opened, and Marzena's eyes widened in surprise, that mix of curiosity and irritation that always preceded a confrontation. I didn't wait for pleasantries. I stepped inside, greeting Carmetta with a nod, a quick squeeze of her shoulder, but kept my attention forward. My mission was clear. From the living room, I laid the documents down, property maps, receipts, tenant records, all carefully dated and organized. When Tanisha appeared, she took her time, walking in with that amused smirk, acting like I was the one overreacting. I didn't flinch. I held her gaze and simply asked to speak with her, my tone calm but unyielding. I started laying out my evidence slowly, each word deliberate. I spoke of financial tampering, unauthorized tenancy changes, violations that shouldn't have happened under anyone's watch, let alone theirs. Tanisha's smirk never faltered, her eyes calculating. "You gave that all away, remember?" she said, voice light, almost teasing. "Don't act brand new." I let her words settle, then replied evenly, "I gave it in trust, not for you to rewrite history." I slid a copy of the voice recording across the table, making no move to play it. Just the presence of proof shifted the atmosphere. Tanisha's expression changed. Subtle, but enough to show she recognized she'd underestimated me. Just then, Lavoris walked in, taking in the room, noticing the arrangement of papers and the recorder. Tension thickened, like a storm pressing down. I spoke slowly, deliberately. "This is your line in the sand. You keep crossing it, and I'll let the whole truth out." He laughed, mocking what he called old man threats, his arrogance filling the room. But I didn't react. I stood firm, calm but immovable. My voice carried conviction, carrying the weight of years and experience. "A man who won't fight for his name will lose more than land, he'll lose his bloodline," I reminded them, a quote my late wife often shared. I turned to Carmetta, who watched wide-eyed from the corner, and said, That name on the deeds, it ain't just mine. It's yours if you want it. Tanisha scoffed, calling it emotional blackmail, but I left her with the envelope on the table. I walked out with measured steps, heart steady, eyes clear. I wasn't leaving defeat behind, I was leaving a warning. I wasn't playing defense anymore. Back in my truck, I let the engine hum beneath me while my mind raced. They had expected silence, compliance, maybe even retreat. Instead, I had delivered the storm. I started reaching out to legal contacts and old allies, not for lawsuits, not yet, but for leverage, preparing quietly for the next moves. This wasn't about property alone anymore. It was about legacy, about respect, about the truth standing firm, where lies had taken root. A buzz on my phone cut through the hum, an unknown number flashing on the screen. The message was simple. I heard you're asking about the deeds. You'll want to talk to me. I stared at the screen, a shiver running through me. I didn't know who it was yet, but something in my gut told me this was the turning point. The storm had only just begun, and this message was the first clap of thunder in a long-expected reckoning. I drove across town with a mix of anticipation and caution, the late afternoon sun cutting sharp shadows across South Halstead. The message from the unknown number in my pocket burned like a small fuse, and I couldn't ignore it. Nia was waiting at the community center, a woman in her mid-40s with a no-nonsense presence. She worked in housing administration, knew the records inside and out, and had that glint of someone who'd seen too much but refused to look away. She handed me a USB drive and a stamped confidential document, her voice low but urgent. Somebody's trying to erase you off paper before they erase you in life. I took the files with thanks, but unease settled in. Why now? Why her? I couldn't shake the feeling the timing was too neat, too orchestrated. The drive home was short but tense. The streets seemed quieter than usual, the city holding its breath. Then, it happened. 2 uniformed officers pulled up beside my truck. Their faces were stern, their questions sharp. They accused me of harassment toward a tenant in a property that, legally, was mine. I remained calm, showing my ID and the ownership papers I carried like armor. One younger cop leaned in, whispering, "They knew where you'd be, sir. This don't feel right." He didn't need to say more. I was released, but the message was clear. Someone had set a trap, and I had walked straight into it. My jaw tightened as I gripped the steering wheel and headed straight to the house, tension climbing with each block. Outside the house, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by rumors someone had spread about me being unstable. Tanisha was on the porch, Lavoris beside her, both playing the part of the victims while quietly filming me. I didn't rise to the bait. I spoke calmly, requesting they step aside so I could enter, but they blocked my path, shouting over me, twisting truth into fear. I raised my hand, letting the USB drive catch the fading sunlight, and said clearly, "You want an audience? Let them see what truth looks like. You think paper lies, but recordings don't." I left them standing there, murmuring and gesturing, holding the USB like a warning, my heart steady despite the storm of betrayal churning inside me. Back in my apartment, I tossed the USB onto the table and ran my fingers over the dinging edges of the folder, mind replaying the confrontation. My father's words echoed in my head. "Don't ever let fools rewrite your life just 'cause they're louder." I plugged the USB into my laptop and listened. Tanasha's voice floated through the speakers, discussing fraudulent rent deals, schemes to manipulate tenant payments, the subtle ways they had tried to erase me. Rage mingled with clarity. This was no longer petty dishonesty or family squabble. It was calculated, deliberate, and malicious. The calm exterior I had maintained in public gave way to a fire that had been smoldering for years, one born of principle, pride, and the refusal to be erased. I picked up the phone and dialed, voice steady but cold. I need to speak with someone about ownership transfers and perjury. I knew the next moves would be decisive. If they wanted a fight, they were about to meet the man they buried long ago. I wasn't just showing up next time, I was showing up with fire and names. I sat in my living room, the weight of the notice heavy in my hands. Lavoris's legal counsel had made it clear: vacate the disputed properties, or face consequences. My eyes fell on the brown silk napkin from my late wife, folded neatly on the side table. I picked it up, feeling the fabric between my fingers, and remembered the Sunday dinners. the gentle care with which she had laid it for me. A gesture of respect and love. My chest tightened with betrayal and a lingering sorrow. But I set the paper aside. I wasn't going anywhere. They wanted me to retreat, to shrink. Not this time. I would stand my ground, and I would do it with the quiet steel my life had forged over decades. Crossing the street to my old home, the documents in my grip felt like both armor and ammunition. The front door was unlocked, an oversight, or perhaps a test. I stepped inside, and the memories hit me like a tide. Laughter echoing from bedrooms, the smell of Sunday dinners simmering, the touch of my children's hands. I walked slowly through the rooms I had built with my own hands, pausing to feel the walls, the floors, the very bones of the house I'd raised my family in. In the living room, I placed the envelope from my meeting with Tanisha on the mantel and whispered to the empty room, "This house remembers me." I left without confrontation, not to reclaim yet, but to remind them, silently, that they could never erase the man who had built these walls from sweat and resolve. On my way back, I stopped at Charvella's house. She greeted me with a guarded expression, but handed me a sealed box. "Mom left you this," she said quietly. I waited for the right moment. Inside, I found her personal ledger, letters, a draft of her will, and a note that read, "He must see truth before he fights." I turned the pages, discovering the careful records of decades past property rights meant to revert fully to me, long before the legal games began. Charvella's voice was calm but firm. "I'm here now, but I can't take sides forever." I nodded, pocketing the box, feeling the shift in burden and responsibility settle on my shoulders. This was more than documents. It was the truth laid bare, a roadmap I would follow with precision. Night fell as I walked home under the streetlights, the box secure in my hands. Each step felt like a heartbeat of purpose, a rhythm that steadied the storm of emotions inside me. They had built walls around me, tried to cage the legacy I had constructed with my own hands, but I still knew the blueprint. Plans began to form, present the legal evidence, confront the family with undeniable truth, perhaps call a community meeting to witness the unfolding of what had been hidden. The ledger was my first line of defense, the documentation of a lifetime of work and honesty. I whispered into the night, "The truth doesn't fade just because people prefer lies." And then I dialed a number I had kept for just this moment, voice steady, unyielding. "I need your signature, the one Mom intended before she left." The reckoning was no longer looming. It had arrived. The apartment was quiet, but my mind was a storm. I had called Clarence, Nia, Miss Audra, and Charvella, asking them to come over discreetly. One by one, they arrived, bringing their expertise, their moral support, and a shared sense of purpose. I laid out everything, the deeds that had been tampered with, the recordings of conversations, Charvella's ledger, tenant statements, all evidence that painted the truth no one could deny. Each of them weighed in, advising caution but acknowledging the gravity of the situation. I listened, nodded, and then spoke with calm authority. Tonight, truth walks through doors they locked me out of. They understood. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was communal vindication, a reckoning that demanded witnesses and allies. Later that evening, I found myself at Lavoris's gathering, a family function masquerading as a celebration of his property renovations. I stayed seated, observing. During the speeches, he casually referred to me as a part-time custodian, deliberately erasing my legacy in front of the room. Tanisha clapped. Marzina beamed, as if they had rescued the property from inevitable decline. I kept my composure, heart steady, but my mind sharp. Internally, I thought, they crowned me a caretaker in my own kingdom. I'd rather be king than a ghost. The insult was loud, public, deliberate, but I did not flinch. I let the weight of their arrogance settle before the storm I carried. During a break, Charvella stepped forward with the sealed box from before. She opened it, revealing the ledger, the will, and my mother's notes. The room fell silent. Lavoris's face shifted, pale and uneasy. I moved to the center, reading aloud a passage. "He who builds must own. The bloodline cannot be erased by greed." Eyes turned toward me. Murmurs filled the room. Questions were asked. Lavoris tried to regain control, but the balance had shifted. The power that once cowered under their self-assured deception now flowed through evidence and truth. Witnesses leaned closer, searching, realizing the foundations of my claim could not be ignored. After the event, I returned to my old home, walking its familiar rooms again, now open and filled with family members who had come seeking clarity. I felt their eyes upon me, some filled with respect, others with shock, a few tinged with guilt. I held the brown silk napkin in my hands, remembering my wife's faith, her quiet certainty that I could see this through. I caught Charvella's eye and nodded a silent acknowledgement. We had shifted the narrative. They had thundered over me for years, but now they would hear me without my speaking a single lie. A lawyer whispered across the yard about embezzlement filings, a warning that the fight was far from over. I clenched the napkin tighter and thought, the ledger was the truth they buried, now I dug it up. The morning sunlight spilled into my small kitchen, catching dust motes in a slow, golden dance. The city was waking, Southside buzzing with its usual hum, but I sat quietly, holding a mug of coffee, watching the day begin. News had already spread, my name was back in place, the property rights restored beyond dispute. Nia had called early, confirming the legal proceedings. Everything was finally settled. Yet, the sensation wasn't joy. It was calm, deep and steady. I whispered to myself, it wasn't about land. It was about standing where I belong. That morning felt like the first breath after a long storm, the kind that leaves silence heavy but clear, and reflection sharper than ever. By mid-morning, I found myself in the courthouse. Tanisha and Lavoris sat there with their attorney, faces carefully composed, eyes deliberately avoiding mine. The session was brief. The judge read aloud the confirmation that the deeds, the homes, everything I had built, was indisputably mine. All fraudulent claims were dismissed. Tanisha tried one last appeal, voice small and strained. We only wanted to protect what's ours. I looked at her, voice even, tone unshaken. You can't protect what you stole. Silence filled the room. Even Lavoris shifted uncomfortably, shame flashing behind a mask of indifference. In that moment, the power I had been building for months crystallized not with vengeance, but with quiet reclamation of dignity. Later that afternoon, I walked through the restored home. Empty rooms echoed with the faint traces of our lives, laughter, arguments, lessons taught and learned. On the dining table lay the brown silk napkin, folded neatly as if waiting. I hadn't placed it there. My wife's voice floated back in memory. Every table needs peace before it needs guests. The words anchored me. I set the napkin in the center, lit a candle beside it, and sat quietly. Time seemed to slow, each heartbeat a reminder of patience and endurance. Grief and solace intertwined as I realized the fight had ended not with a shout, but with this quiet, steadfast reclamation of home and self. Carmetta came later, hesitant and apologetic, speaking softly about past choices and her lack of courage in moments that mattered. I reached out, took her hand, and forgave her with a nod, a gentle but firm reminder. Don't waste energy fighting ghosts. Build your own name right. I handed her a copy of the deed, a tangible symbol of legacy, and told her it was hers to carry when my time came. It wasn't just property, it was bloodline, history, and honor preserved. In that exchange, I felt the real power of ownership, not the control of walls and locks, but the dignity to pass forward what was earned through endurance and integrity. As the sun lowered into the horizon, I stepped onto the porch, the city quieting around me. In my hands, I held a photograph of my wife, her eyes steady and knowing. The weight of years, of betrayal, of struggle, felt lighter. A distant gospel hum drifted across the street, soft, unwavering. I breathed deeply, the wind carrying a sense of resolution. They mocked my work, my years, my worth. But in the end, silence spoke for me. I smiled, a gentle, weary smile. I guess I'm home now. Some storms don't destroy, they reveal who still stands when it clears. And now, I could finally move forward, carrying the past with respect, not burden.